Welcome back to the channel. I've got something a little bit different for you today, but I think you're really going to enjoy it. So you know me as a guy who sleuths through endless footage, but one area that has evaded me is the grinders. It's really hard to see what's going on there, and I thought we needed some inside information to get the full story to you. So today I've got Freddie Carr on the channel for a chat, and he's going to take us through the development of the grinder roll from the old IACC class right the way through to the AC75. Some fascinating insights about how the world of America's Cup sailing has changed, as well as the unique 6 grinder setup on Team INEOS UK, which I think, according to Freddie, they think is still a real big gain despite their exit from the competition. So, bit of a longer format than what you may be used to from my channel, so I put bookmarks in the video so you can flick forward and back to the bits you want to watch. However, it's a Saturday, there's no racing on. Grab yourself a coffee and enjoy. Freddie's a great character, really good to interview, so thanks for his time, and yeah, let's listen to what he's got to say. Okay, well, welcome to Mozzy Sales, Freddie. It's great to have you on. Commiserations about INEOS's early exit, but the good news for myself and the good people watching that is we get to have you on the channel for a bit of discussion. And what I'd like to chat to you about today is really, I don't think there's anyone better placed than you to talk about how the grinder roll has developed over the years and through the generations of America's Cup boats. And yeah, but before we get into that, just to introduce you to anyone who doesn't know, Freddie is one of the INEOS grinders, a veteran of, is it 5 America's Cup campaigns? Is that right?
Yeah, just that was my 5th, the one that we're in the middle of now. It's my 5th, yeah.
Wow, yeah. So GBR Challenge, a stint on Luna Rossa, BAR, Land Rover in Bermuda, and now INEOS and Sweden.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, Sweden. Victory Challenge in 07 in Valencia for the 32nd Cup.
Okay, so there's no better guy in the world possibly to give us a bit of insight into the development of these boats and the progression over the years. And I was trying to wrap my brain, but I don't think I could think of anyone in the Cup who has probably been involved in more cycles. Maybe someone who did the deed of gift, I don't know.
Yeah, no, Joey Newton, my teammate at INEOS Team UK, he did the Cup before me, and Jimmy Spithill for that matter, actually. Yeah. So Jimmy and Joey were both involved in Young Australia in 2000, and then they both sailed in the Deed of Gift match as well in 2010. So I think those guys have just finished their 7th, so that's pretty phenomenal. So fair play to them. But yeah, I've just clocked up number 5, which makes me feel suitably old, that's for sure.
Wow, I'm sure you've got more in you, and yeah, we'd love to see you back. And for that matter, the whole of INEOS, like the team's developed so much, progressed so much. I think we don't know what the Cup's going to be like next time, but I don't know. No. I've got my fingers crossed that you guys are involved again.
Yeah, so have we. Like it's been a hell of a journey, particularly the last 3 months. It felt wildly different from Bermuda, whereas in Bermuda we were, from 6 months out, we were struggling really hard to try and scrape up to that level to be competitive in the round robins and that side of things. Whereas this time round, we obviously had the low of the Christmas Cup, the massive high of the round robins, and then it brought back down to earth again in the Prada Cup final. So it's been a very, very different emotional journey, I'd say, this time round to the 2017 Cup.
You, as a very interested spectator, it certainly feels like a roller coaster. And I think in some ways, you know, you've been unlucky when you've been down and that's accentuated it. And then you've, you know, probably ridden your luck a little bit through the round robins in terms of your matchups. And that probably, you know, over-egged people's expectations possibly about what could be achieved later on.
I think that's a fair assessment, to be honest, Tom. Like, we had our golden days on course C that really suited our style of sailing and the way that we set up Tanya, and ultimately we had a Prada Cup final against the Italians in fundamentally under 14 knots of wind, where they were faster than us, and we know in this game that the faster boat wins, and I think that's all it boils down to.
Right, so I mean, one of the reasons I've asked you onto this channel is like people would know me as a guy who plays spot the difference with America's Cup boats. That's my thing, is looking at what I can see, and I go through all the stern cam footage, listen to the audio, and pick out things I can see that's different about the foils, the hulls, the rigs. But one thing I can't see that much of, frustratingly for myself, is exactly what the grinders are doing, the grinders roles. Yeah, I'd really like to know, in terms of development through the years, of how that role's changed.
Well, it's been a phenomenal shift in the sport, and I think other than the introduction of the flight controller, it's probably been the role that's changed the most in the America's Cup. Like, for sure, the trimmers are still trimming sails, and yes, they were trimming wings for a while, and the helmsmen are still doing match racing pre-starts. They're just doing it 4 times faster than they used to. But I'd say that the drivetrain and what the grinders get up to, from where I started in the America's Cup Jubilee in Cowes in 2001 versus 20 years later, what I was doing last week, is a completely different sport. Both the physical requirements, what you're actually doing on the boat, and the functions and what you're moving. Now, when I first stepped on a cup boat for the America's Cup Jubilee in 01, I was one of 4 grinders on an IACC class boat, and you were solely moving winches. The grinders were set up in like that T formation, with the guys at the front here fundamentally controlling the primaries, and the 2 guys fore and aft behind them could click into the primaries and the forward guys as well, but were also connected to the runners and the main sheet winches. Those winches, depending on what winch package you had, would be an 8 or a 6-speed winch. You'd be driving the 2 primaries, a pit winch, a main sheet winch, and 2 runner winches. So between those 8 grinders, you had to perfectly coordinate how to get the ropes and sails flying up and down and in and out in a pre-start, and then the hoist and the drops. And I must say that the coordination required from the grinding unit in those 03 and 07 cups to get the boat around the course was probably something a little bit that's been lost in the foiling side of things. As the great Andrew Simpson once said, "Keep it simple, stupid." And that's kind of what grinding has become now. As it's become physically harder, you're trying to make the role of the grinder easier, so they can just output the power without fundamentally having to overthink the maneuvers too much. But for sure, those first 2 cup cycles I did, the 03 and 07 cups, the coordination needed amongst those 8 grinders to get that boat around the course beautifully and in a winning state is something that I think we've kind of lost a little bit with this foiling generation.
Yeah, I mean, certainly on the 72s out in San Francisco, that was a huge step change. Obviously, the deed of gift in between, but how is it like stepping on those boats with Luna Rossa? And
that was a real funny one. That was very much a transitional cup, I think. Now, not only in terms of, it was a huge transition from the monohulls that we saw in if you put the deed of gift to one side, from the monohulls that we saw in 07 to the cats we saw in 13, and you kind of had the two. So you had the big boat grinders that had transitioned out of the old school cup. And for the first time ever, we started seeing athlete grinders, like some guys that weren't necessarily from a sailing background that had come on board to move winches and move oil. Now, those 2013 boats, looking back to how we thought we were going to get the boat around the course, just makes me laugh now. Obviously, the boats were hugely wide, so they were 14 meters wide, and we were moving this big, powerful wing. But fundamentally, we were all grinding on one side of the boat. At the very front of the boat, in the pit area, we had a huge 1111 Harken winch that we used to get the dagger boards up and down. So on Luna Rossa, we used to wind the dagger boards. We used to wind ropes with a bunch of purchases to get the dagger boards up and down. And if you missed board extension in a jibe, for example, you would then spend the next sort of 45 seconds effectively winding the boat up the foil as the foil stayed in the water. And I'll always remember that, thinking to myself as we're doing it, there's got to be a better way of doing this. And then you'd have a jib winch, another 1111 halfway down the stack of 4 grinders.
Yeah.
And that had a vertical disconnect, so you could choose when to go into the jib and trim the jib and then drop that out and trim into the main sheet. Now, the interesting thing was the wing there and the Traveller was so loaded that it was very, very hard to actively trim the Traveller, as we saw in Bermuda, and actively trim the Traveller like we've seen over the last few months. So the helmsman had to steer around a lot more, and the grinders couldn't necessarily be as dynamic as they wanted to be on the Traveller sheet, as we've seen. And that's where the game is now, in my mind, how actively you can move the Traveller, and we'll get onto that. And I think it wasn't only until Oracle, halfway through the match, changed their wing setup with their really sort of stand-up lower section and then that huge blade out through the top, that their grinders were actually able to get on top of moving the Traver actively enough to help contribute to the foiling style that we saw them turn that cup around. But yeah, that was the 13 Cup was a real funny one for the grinders. The other thing that kind of was beginning to land on our radar was rake control, and the hydraulics on that boat were fairly basic, and we hydraulically moved the dagger boards, or the dagger board case, to control the rake, as we did with the 50s. But it was kind of the loads in the boat and the technology at the time made it very hard to actively trim the dagger board case. So it seems funny now, but when we first launched the Luna Rossa boat, we only had one grinding pedestal that was able to actively move that rake, and it was, you'd go into the bearway, and Chris Draper, who was our helmsman, would kind of suggest a number that we set the rake to, and you'd bear away on that rake and hope that it didn't sky you or nosedive you, and you there wasn't that much of active rake control, and it was a kind of a set and forget. You'd have a downwind setting and upwind setting, and you compare that to certainly where we were when we were moving the dagger board case in the 50s. That was pretty funny. So yeah, that cup. And I said to a few of the boys, like Giles and Nick Hutton, the other day, like, if we went back to the big cats from San Fran now, even though it's only 7-8 years ago, knowing what we know and the advances in technology, those things would just be unbelievable. But yeah, I feel privileged to have sailed those ones. I think they were monsters that may never rear their heads again. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's certainly a special cup, that. I mean, amazing in so many ways, but the boats were so unknown. And I can remember when they started foiling for the first time, we started to hear reports that Team New Zealand were trying to lift this thing up the foot. And obviously all the talk before it had been how the rule had been written to kind of preclude that. And then you hear these rumours coming out, and I still didn't believe them when we got to San Fran, really. And it's only when I saw the boats going around that harbour, my God, that was incredible, but scary as well.
We were the same. So a group of young Brits, myself, Nick Hutton, Giles Scott, Alistair Richardson, signed up with Luna Rossa on the back of sort of Max Serena reigniting their cup ambitions, and we had the partnership deal with New Zealand where they bought their first design package, and we had absolutely no idea about the foiling until we arrived down in Auckland to sort of receive the big boat. We'd done a bunch of 45 sailing, so we kind of got the traditional 45s, obviously, before they were foiling. And I always remember we went into a briefing room and Max said, right, this is what it is going to look like. This is what we're buying into. And he put on a video of them sailing their SL33 and their test boat. And obviously, to begin with, it wasn't foiling. And then this thing popped out the water, and our jaws just hit the floor, you know. And I guess that's where all of our, or certainly my foiling foiling journey started. And to look at that video of the SL33 to then 18 months later be foiling, although just downwind in our boat, in fact downwind in most boats until the match, was quite the journey.
How did you feel about it at the time? Did you think it was a good idea? Did you think it was going in the wrong direction? Can you recall back to what your opinion was at the time?
I do. I mean, at the time, I thought it was cool. I thought it was very, very cool. Kind of having done 10 years of America's Cup and been schooled out of the old school, I guess you'd say, and sort of come up through a match racing background rather than a high performance dinghy background, and certainly a foiling background. I kind of struggled to see initially how it could translate into the America's Cup. I guess you could say I was a bit of a traditionalist back then, and now with a bit of hindsight and a bit of perspective, it's 100% the right call. It's 100% the right call in the way that the America's Cup's gone. And I actually think where we've landed with the AC75 is very close to kind of a really nice mix of close to the crew work and dynamics that we had on the old IACC class boats, with the excitement of the foiling and the boundary race course and the stadium sailing. So I mean, yeah, I personally think that we need to carry this class on, because I think it's very close to the mark with what the sport needs right now, with a bit of clarity to have a couple of cup cycles in this class and see where it can go.
Yeah, we'll get on to 75 again, but from my personal perspective, it feels like, you know, these four teams have blazed a trail now, proven the technology, got boats on the water, and hopefully, you know, more teams will follow and more syndicates be able to come into the Cup, even if they're buying second-hand or design packages. But, you know, a second iteration of a class rule always makes it more attainable, I think, for more teams. So
I think you're right, and I think that the path has been trodden, you know, and the four teams, as you said, have proved out the concept. And I think more than anything, and I'm sure we'll see it next week in the match, the racing is good. The racing is good. And what you used to get in some of the old Cup races back in the day, in 03, I remember there'd be 2-hour races and they'd be over off the start line. And it was probably still enjoyable just about for a sailing fan, but you certainly weren't drawing in sports fans. Now what you get now is the lads that I went to university with, who are sports nuts but not sailing fans, regardless of me being involved, were waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and watching the racing. They were absolutely loving it.
Nice. Well, let's we've kind of jumped onto 75 there, but I want to go back to back to Bermuda, because I see this as a big step in the power demands. Those boats were crazy, and you touched on the rake control earlier. What was it like getting on those boats and the power demands as a grinder?
Do you know that was when it got very real for us, that the sport had changed beyond belief. Like I said, in 13, the boats were so big that you kind of had to steer around them a bit and have a few set and forget settings. And yeah, you were working hard, but ultimately you were struggling to shift the Traveller fast enough to pop you on the foil. Whereas when we shifted into Bermuda and onto the AC50s, it got very real. And the fact that a 25-minute race was going to be a max heart rate race, because you could move everything. And the more you moved it, the faster you went, as Team New Zealand eventually proved out. Now, the thing that we had with Land Rover BAR is, compared to the other teams, we kind of made the shift to a completely hydraulic platform straight away. So what you'd have seen on all the other boats, apart from maybe Team New Zealand, is they had the wing winch and a clutch underneath the wing winch, and they would clutch in and out of the winch when they wanted to move the sheet. And I think you might recall those big loud bangs off Artemis and Oracle in Japan. That's the clutch firing, spinning the winch. And when you're not spinning the winch, you're filling the accumulators, getting ready for the next maneuver. And we took a step away from that, and we gave Paul Campbell James, our wing trimmer, a load cell rope on a load cell. So he was like he was holding a traveller, and he would basically pull on the load cell to move the traveller accordingly. And my memories of those are, there were moments in those races where you felt like you were drowning pretty much. You felt like, because you're only one of six, that as one of the bigger fellas on those boats, that I felt if I mismanaged my energy levels throughout the race, you might not be able to lift the board out the next tack or jibe, or you might not have enough live rake to move the dagger board in the case. So I was in the very front position on those boats, and you'd enter the pre-start you had 3 accumulators on those boats. You had a rake accumulator, which moved the dagger board case and the rudders, and you had a lift and a drop accumulator each side in each hull. So a port and starboard accumulator that could help you lift or drop the boards. And you'd enter the pre-start with all of those full, and you would try and get away with not refilling the lift accumulators throughout the whole race. So you're trying not to put too much energy into them. And everybody across the sort of 2-year work up to that cup was trying to figure out how to drop the boards and how to lift the boards, whether you'd do it manually or whether you'd use the accumulator to do it. Now, what we all found is that when you fired the board down and drove it with the accumulator and then maybe finished with a bit of manual grinding, it was really hard to keep the board drop consistent, and B, to fill the accumulator again for the next maneuver throughout the race. So what people ended up doing is they would manually drive the board down, grind the board down, and you'd use the rake and the rate of turn to get the board onto the lock. And then you'd pop out onto the next tack, and you'd use the lift accumulator to fire the board up. So basically doing the easy work. You'd use the accumulator to do the easy work. And then the other thing you're doing is the live rake control. So we were hydraulically moving CJ's Traveller, and we were also moving, doing live rake. And when the demands for when the demands for the rake got too much for the live rake, the accumulator would kick in and give it a bit of a burst. And I'll tell you, Tom, like those races, as I said, being one of a unit of 6, so effectively for us, it was 4 grinders, and Giles, bless him, was trying to help us as much as he could, but he was also trying to help Ben. You felt super exposed on those boats, and they were harder physically. I think they were harder to sail than where we've ended up with the AT75, which is good because it means we've got our systems better.
So a little backstory here. You actually, leading up to that cup, you almost ended up in a fitness test against me, which you won't have known about because it never happened.
Goodness.
Yeah, BBC contacted some local cycling clubs to try and get a cyclist to pit up against the against the grinders. Little did they know what would happen in 6 months' time. So this was in about November or October time, and
we could have done with a heads up there.
Well, this was my idea. Like, I'm full of these good ideas, and this was my good idea. I was like, they're gonna ask me to go along to BAR. They don't know I'm a sailor as well. I'm going to show up. Yeah. And I was I was decently good cyclist, weighed about 62 kilos and could put out 300 plus watts for 20 minutes. I was like, this is it. They're going to put me in a fitness
You're right
test.
there, aren't you?
And I was like, they're going to think I'm amazing and I can sail as well. It's going to be the dream. I'll be like, just put me on the back on a bike. And then when April came the next year...
You could have let us know, mate. It would have chucked you on the bike. It'd all been a different story.
I know, yeah.
Oh,
so
it's funny though. Obviously, looking back to that cup, the standout is just, as Glenn Ashby put it, how far they threw the design ball away that no one could catch up. And we had no idea what they were doing with the bikes. They did phenomenally well to keep that under wraps, even to the point that all of their social media on them with their first boat was them grinding away, and they had videos of their boys grinding in the gym, and you look back at it now and you're like, boy, they pulled the wool over our eyes. And then obviously when they rolled out the boat that eventually went on to win the cup, it was done. And Oracle obviously tried to react with Tommy's little BMX bike on the back of the boat. But I think the damage was done, and for me, it wasn't only the power that those guys were putting out with their legs that enabled their designers to make like foils that are looser and harder to control, and therefore needed more power for the ride height. I think the biggest one for me is that it freed up Blair to fly the boat, you know, and that's something that we took with us into this campaign with INEOS, about sort of sharing the roles and freeing people up and actually letting the talent at the back of the bus do their thing while we try as a sailing team, the other 6 or 7, try and take that side of things away from them. So fair play to them. I mean, I think they were all in. They were do or bust, I believe. They were down to 5 million Kiwi dollars during 2014, and to draw it back from there, you can only doff your cap to them.
Yeah,
phenomenal.
I think one of the things I like about the Kiwi design is when they do find these areas of improvement, is they're quite good at then optimizing the rest of the boat to match it. They realize what the advantage is and then meet it in other areas of the design, which is that's some clever thinking that it's hard to match up. Doesn't matter how fancy your AI is in your simulator, some of those kind of off the wall ideas that you put in before the simulator happens is really clever stuff from them.
They're very good. They are very good at realizing what the big difference makers are going to be, and investing well into those, and also realizing that the rabbit holes that you can go down and quickly shelving those. And I think that's something that you only get with a number of cup cycles under your belt, and just building up that nous around that sort of design team and sailor team coordination, basically.
Going on to the 75s then, and it looks like a pretty intensive setup, especially for INEOS. Like, one of the first things we noticed when the boat launched was you guys are essentially 6 grinders. Well, it's not even, it's four full-time grinders, 2 jib trims, and then Lee and Jerry. I mean, Jerry pitches in a decent amount. Lee, very scarcely, I've noted.
Yeah. So as you said, Tom, we're 4 full-time grinders, and then we have 2 grinder trimmers, which is Nick Hutton and Joey Newton, and then our pilots are Lee and Luke Parkinson. And Lee, bless him, he's like the scrum half in rugby, in my opinion. You know, he's a lot of effort and he's a lot of noise, and he's always there at the back of the pack, kind of cleaning the rock out. And he's good value, Lee. When he does get on and push hard, you do notice it. He's got good fire in his belly, that one.
Yeah, and it's actually quite good because he's got a good sight out the boat as well on that, especially on that starboard side for when you're on someone's hip, calling that. And I'm sure Luke's doing the same on the other side as well. It's quite interesting actually, the comms we get off the boat. I think not everyone's mic'd up for the the audio.
So we had Ben, obviously Giles, and I think Lee. But
Lee was on there.
Parko was talking the similar chat to Lee on the port side of the yacht, and obviously Bleds is running the speed loop. I don't really know whether Bleds was mic'd up, but Bleds is very much running the speed loop, and he was the kind of grinder's main voice, I would suggest, in terms of what's going to happen next in terms of the speed loop setup, and then you're very much dialed into Ben and Giles with Lee and Parko painting a kind of slightly bigger picture when they were grinding and able to look over the side of the boat.
So, I mean, one of the things that struck me, and I've tried to do a lot of research into this, as you can imagine, and feel free to answer or not, but with 6 guys on the boat who are mainly grinding, are you just, you didn't seem to have any problems with sail control that I could see visibly. I looked at the traveller movement, and you seemed to be pretty much there with traveller movement, maybe a fraction less main sheet movement, but I couldn't really pick anything up definitive. So are you guys just fitter? Are you doing less or grinding more often? What's the deal?
I would say no. That's a good question, and we obviously watch as much Sturm Can footage as you do to get to the depth of your analysis. I would say I'd say that we probably grind more than certainly Luna Rossa. For sure, we grind more than Luna Rossa. I'd say our traveller movement is fairly up there, but that's our style of sailing. I would suggest that Luna Rossa have a kind of grind on demand style of sailing. So when I don't know, this is what I am assuming, is that when their mainsail trimmer says trim or grind or traveller on, they kind of give it a turn of the handles, and otherwise than that they're low windage, so arguably less dynamic. But I'm not saying that's slower, because obviously they were faster than us, so I will go on and say that. I'd say we're a similar kind of work rate to Team New Zealand. I think there's a similar style there in terms of work rate. And it kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier, like there is the accumulator that is there to help you sail the boats, and it's that kind of mix of using the accumulator and using live sailing. And I think that everybody across the four teams had a sort of percentage variance of how they would go live sailing, let's say. So when the grinders are spinning their handles, it moves the traveller or moves the main sheet or whatever that looks like, versus using the accumulator to do the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that gets on to one of my other questions, which I find hard to visualize, is how much is just, oil going into accumulator, how what's the volume of storage in that? Because I know from a cycling background how different a race is when it's stop-start to a race which is just a time trial where it's one steady effort. And I've had Matt on the channel ages ago talking about the efforts in rowing compared to the sailing, and he was saying how on off it potentially is, but the size of the accumulator surely affects that. How does that play out?
We were talking about the AC50, so that had 3 accumulators on. Now I might stump myself a little bit here in terms of volume. Well, this boat has a third the accumulator capacity as the 50. I might be wrong there, but I'm trying to pick my brain back to the rule. So if the F50 had 3 2-litre accumulators, so 6 litres of accumulated oil, this has only got 1 accumulator on board. Mm-hmm. And then you can pick and choose how you to use that oil effectively. So you're charging this hydraulic bomb, and you can pick and choose how to use that oil in any which way you want, depending on your sailing style. All the grinders on our boat have a display that would show you the state of energy of the boat and the things that you're controlling. And as you said, that Matt Gottrell, Shrek as we know him, supremely fit guy and a great sailor in his own right, he would take it as a personal affront to fill that accumulator. And even if one little bar of accumulator pressure went out, he would just absolutely send it. So he was a great guy to sail with for that. He certainly was absolutely everything for 25 minutes. I love the guy.
Yeah, some big units at the front of that boat. I've heard some rumours back in the day about Brittle and when he tried out for INEOS, and apparently, was it Chris Draper had recommended him? This has been a story I've been told, but good to check out of you. Apparently, Chris Draper had recommended him, and he gave the numbers, but no one believed him. So they brought him in and thought it'd be a good chuckle to watch to see if the numbers were actually real or not, because he thought it had to be Chris messing up what the numbers were. Yeah. And then they got him on the ergo, and he put out more than what had been reported. Yeah. I'm not sure if that's true, but it's a great story. He's a big lad.
It sounds about right, and he's a gentle giant, big Chris, very humble, really intelligent guy, and he along with Graham Spence and Nigel Rosewall, who was in charge of our drivetrain, those 3 specifically and a little bit with me getting in the way, I guess, and coming up with crazy ideas. Those three, maybe I was a group of four, and the younger guys. We came up with this drivetrain that we're incredibly proud of, and it's something that in my 20 years of America's Cup, people have been talking about this style of drivetrain for a while. I mean, as we've spoken around, we, with our sports science head of human performance, Ben Williams, very early on came to the conclusion that grinding forwards is 15% more powerful than grinding backwards, no matter what it is, no matter whether it's a sprinting or a 20-minute effort. So then we looked at how much energy is lost, like when you're sharing a pedestal, and so one person grinding forwards, one person grinding backwards, what that looks like. And over about a sort of 4 or 5 month period, we with a lot of horrible tests in there, I must say, in the gym, we came to the conclusion that, as you saw on Britannia, if all, let's call it 8, but 6, sometimes 4 grinders were on their own pedestal grinding forwards, you would produce 17 to 20% more power, be it a sprint or across a 20-minute effort, than one guy grinding forwards and one guy grinding backwards on the same pedestal. So you take that across 6 guys, and that's where we can automatically find that 20% more power to pretty much free up Giles so he can swan around the back of the boat and do what he does best. So that was a huge thing on the sports science side of things. And then we chucked the ball to Nigel Rosewall, who is our head of drivetrain, and he came up with a solution of how to drive a winch, a 6-speed winch, just forwards, which people have been talking about doing for 20 years, because just the efficiency of, on a normal winch where you're grinding in first, and then you drop the overdrive. So you're grinding in first overdrive, then you drop the overdrive with traditionally a shake, then you're in first normal, then you click the overdrive back in and go second overdrive, have a shake, go second, then click the overdrive back in and go third overdrive, have a shake and go third. So that whole kerfuffle to go through 6 gears in a winch versus grind forwards as hard as you can and move through 6 gears. That's where we got to. And I think and Nigel and Graham and Chris in particular should be incredibly proud of the product they produced. And everyone talks about the America's Cup trickle down, and I think you can take that with a pinch of salt, but those 3 guys could well have done something, and have done something, that I think you could see in TP52s and mini maxis, maybe not so much in offshore boats because of the intricacies of the system downstairs, but they made a huge step forwards. So I take my hat off to those guys.
Fascinating stuff. And yeah, I mean, looking from my kind of cycling efficiency point of view, looking at it with you kind of all linked up, so the person over your shoulder is linked into there, taking the load off you in the dead spots, you might normally have anyway, so you don't really lose out there. But who gets to select the gear though for you all? Like, who's the
So without going sort of too much into it, there's of the 4 grinders, it's all well and good just having a grinder there, just putting down power and not really having a control on the boat. But I go back to our Team New Zealand philosophy, where we saw Blair ease up Pete so Pete could drive the boat so well. We carrying that on into INEOS. We thought there's no reason why we can't offload these, and we're all sailors, so we all can kind of read a race course and know what's coming next. And we offloaded a few sort of little bits and bobs around the performance of the boat onto the grinders as well. Now, I wrote an article in Seahorse with Dave Munge and Dr. Walsh the other day about sort of what you can achieve cognitively whilst you're operating at functional threshold power. So when you're above, there you go, good man. So it's actually what you can achieve when your body is in distress and you're working hard, what you can focus on and do to a good level. And fundamentally, when you're in that last 20% of heart rate, no matter who you are in the world, no matter whether you're the best SAS soldier, whether you're a fighter pilot, whether you're a world-class rugby player, footballer, whatever, as soon as you're at that level where your body is in distress and you're operating in your last 20% of heart rate, you can only concentrate on one thing and do that thing really well. You can't concentrate on two. If you try and concentrate on two, you mess them both up. So kind of taking that on board, knowing that we were going to be working hard, we gave our 4 grinders a task to complete well, to do well, that we knew would make the boat go faster and unload the guys at the back of the boat. And that was a nice little step forward in our performance, but it was something that we knew we could do very early on, and it kind of underpinned a lot of our drivetrain decisions.
Sometimes it's quite nice to just have one simple cognitive task to focus on to take your mind off the pain as well. That's another aspect to it.
There is a bit of that. There is a bit of that, and we were very lucky. You'd have seen our big white displays on board. Our structures guys did such a good job with the weight of the boat that we were able to have those displays because kind of we were not that stressed about weight, and just to have those displays displaying very simply the things that you were in control of on the boat, as well as having like a little tactical aid. So even if you weren't in those moments of panic where you weren't quite sure whether you were kind of going to go, say, 2 and in left turn versus 1 and in right turn, or whatever that might look like, you can just glance down at your tactical app, and without Giles talking or Ben talking about the thing you want to hear, you can, as a sailor, you could look at that and go, okay, we're quite obviously going to go right turn here and 1 and in right turn, and complete your tasks to get ready for that. So that was pretty nice as well. And just making that, as we talk about in your moments of being in your threshold power. So sort of for me, that would be north of 160 heart rate, making that really simple to read, much like a Garmin bike computer. When you're hurting, you just throw your glance down there, check in your cadence, check in on your power, and then look back up. And it was much like that. We went around that philosophy.
Excellent. Yeah, really interesting stuff. I won't press you too much on it. There's some interesting things I've seen there. Maybe I'll put a video out on myself, but I won't make you you divulge anything.
Okay.
Let's talk about some more fun stuff. So there's 2 things that I want to get onto. First of all, I saw on your sailing CV you've listed toppers, which is about. I've got my people notice it. I've got my topper World 6 prize.
Stop it. What colour was your topper?
My topper, I had a few. I had a yellow, then a grey, and then finally a classic red. What about you then?
Oh, yeah. No, I was purple all the way. But Giles is also a good topper lad. He swears by red toppers. So I'm kind of annoyed now. I think if I had a red topper, the world would have been my oyster. But wasn't to be.
Great stuff. And then finally, I know you have the data. You've all got power meters on. The big thing we're all asking at home is who puts out more power, port or starboard on INEOS?
Oh, yeah. Do you know, that's a real funny one. And I'll wind it back to the 07-03 Cup. Now, obviously we live with comms units and microphones and that side of things. And we had two loops on our boat, and we had one specific loop where the grinders could just talk to each other. Which got fairly hilarious at times, as you can well imagine, with our level of banter. But the real funny thing on sailing these boats is you are in your own little world. So when you were sailing on the old IACC class boats, I was the grinder in the middle that kind of linked the front two and the back guy, and you could do a lot with looking around and seeing what people were about to do, and without communicating verbally, you could see if someone was pushing in what direction. So you'd click in and join them and do that, and you'd change, and a lot of it was done with visual communication. Now we're dug away in these trenches, and I basically sailed next to Neil Hunter, and he's the only guy that I could see. So I could see when Neil was pushing. I couldn't really see when Nick Hutton was pushing the next one down. And then the same with Lee, the third on our stack on the starboard side. And we were on a completely different kind of system to the guys on the port side. And you had no idea of their level of effort. So we kind of, you could see what state the boat was in. So you'd assume that when everything was rosy and we'd got sort of a minute and a half on a board, everyone was having a breather. But it was amazing the amount of times we'd finish a practice race or whatever it might be, and Neil and I would look at each other and go, tell you what, we were completely on top of that. That was fairly straightforward. You'd go over to the port side of the boat and Brittle and Shrek were absolutely on their knees. And we're like, oh, that might have been quite easy for us because it was tough for them. And that's certainly no reflection of their fitness levels. They are fitter than butcher's dogs, but it is very strange having that detached crew, port and starboard. But I guess in answer to your question, starboard side won every day. And I'm sure if you asked Matty Gottrell, he'd say port side won every day.
Yeah, I'm gonna once he's got a little baby that just out, so he's giving him a bit of time. But then I'm gonna get him on and I'll give him a right of reply to that allegation.
Yeah, that's fair enough, Tom. Yeah, that's fair enough, mate.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks very much for your time. That was super interesting and a real insight into the role of the grinders. And I feel like I can at least say I've made the effort now to talk about what's going on at the front of the boat and shed a light on it.
We're the real heroes out there. We know that. It's not about the helmsmen and the pilots. It's all about the grinders. Something like that. And I wish, like I said, I wish I could talk more about the AC75, but INEOS have a great desire, or the team have a great desire to go again, and we're immensely proud of what we've produced. And who knows, if we talk again in 5 years and the AC75 isn't a thing, I'll let you know just how we did it. But yeah, fair play to, like I said, to Nigel and the guys at Mercedes who helped him getting to where we were on our boat. It was fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, great catch up with you, and we'll have to grab a beer back on the Hisk balcony when we're allowed.
Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah.
Hopefully sooner rather than later, mate.
Okay, so a bit of a departure from my usual format, but I hope you really enjoyed that. I certainly was appreciative of Freddie's time. Fascinating guy, great character, good to chat to, and I think he actually gave us quite a few decent insights into how this role has changed over time, and also where INEOS clearly view they did have an advantage in their 6 grinder setup. So yeah, some compelling stuff, and yeah, I hope you enjoy the format. We've got another couple of interviews coming out, so yeah, stay tuned for them. Let me know if you like the content, and yeah, looking forward to some racing next week. Take care.